Hey, I'm Sarah.
And I'm Amy.
Welcome to United Humans, a podcast that goes into the personal lives of our 6,000 plus volunteer medics and their families.
75-year-old male, possible cardiac arrest.
My name is Gabi Friedson.
I'm Dina. This is Ronnie. We're a couple.
I'm Vicky.
United Hatzalah's only mission is saving lives, and we'll discuss how that doesn't leave room for discrimination against color, race, religion, or sexual orientation.
Let's talk about fear, trauma, pain, and connection.
Join us. Let's discuss these diverse volunteers from all across the country. Welcome back, everybody, to United Humans, a podcast where we go into the personal lives of our medics. This week, though, we are going in a little bit of a different direction. We have two guests here. One is named Dr. Sharon Slater. The other is Rabbi Daniel Katzenstein. And these two medics are going to introduce themselves. We're going to not necessarily go into their lives today. We're going to be sticking to the narrative of our recent mission in Moldova. And specifically, both of these incredible medics sitting with us today are in the Psychotrauma unit. So we're going to be discussing the mission, their role in the mission, and specifically about our Psychotrauma unit. But before we begin, thank you so much for both of you for coming. And of course, I'm sitting here with my co-host, Amy.
Happy to be back and talking about such an important mission and finding out more information for everybody out there.
Absolutely. So it's obviously a very hot topic, but let's start from the beginning. So if you can each give me an introduction of your name, where you're from originally, maybe when you made Aliyah, where you live now, and how long you've been in United Hatzalah.
Okay, my name is Dr. Sharon Slater. I'm a clinical psychologist. I made Aliyah from Woodmere, New York, for those of you who know Long Island.
For sure.
And that
my
was...
husband's from there.
Oh, there you go. And that was 30 years ago this December. So we just celebrated 30 years in Israel, which means I spent the majority of my life as an Israeli. Mm-hmm. I practice as a psychologist here in Israel, and about 21 years ago, I became a medic. Because I had 5 small children at home and was concerned that I didn't even know how to take out a foreign object, so I became a medic. Following that, in 2016, I joined the Psychotrauma unit and trained with them so that I could utilize my skills as a clinical psychologist in the context of United Hatzalah. And since then, I've been on 3 missions. The first was to Texas, to Hurricane Harvey. The second was 9 months ago to Surfside in Miami, Florida, and this last one was to Moldova.
Rabbi, it's all yours.
All right. Daniel Katzenstein, made Aliyah from Dallas, Texas, about almost 25 years ago, 1998.
Is that why you don't have an accent?
That's why I guess I don't have an accent. I currently live in Made Aliyah, live in Neve Yaakov. Right away when I made Aliyah, I got involved in life-saving as an EMT. I've been with United Hatzalah since 2007 or so, and was one of the founding members of the Psychotrauma unit. It was something when I saw it was in development, I realized it was something that was vital to be part of the fabric of United Hatzalah. Growing up in the post-Vietnam War era in America, there started to be awareness of PTSD and psychological issues relating to trauma and experiences. And I didn't see that level of awareness in Israel. And there's plenty of experiences in Israel that would require this response. And I wanted the United Hatzalah to be on the forefront of treating people and providing intervention when it's early enough to make a difference.
And I think it's really important to mention that we have now about 6,200 medics in Hatzalah, and you were part of the first, I want to say 50. Is that true? 100?
The first 100 or so,
okay.
Yeah. That was from the beginning.
So there was just those few guys that got together and brought United Hatzalah to be an organization, and you were one of them. So that's a pretty big deal to be a pioneer and a trailblazer of this organization. Just wanted to recognize that.
And was Moldova and Ukraine the first mission you went on?
It was the first international mission that I had been on. Yeah, we had been as a psychotrauma response unit. The unit we had our first mass casualty psychotrauma incident with a terror attack in Talpiot at the promenade, when a terrorist ran a truck into a group of soldiers, and we had trained soldiers who were just overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment. And we had pretty much the entire unit, the entire psychotrauma unit, spread out throughout a very large area, treating the soldiers and providing that initial intervention. And I've got to say, the benefit from immediate intervention, like United Hatzalah is capable of doing, whether it's in medical situations and now with psychotrauma response, it's fascinating to see, and the impact is far-reaching.
Absolutely.
And I think it's important to just add to what Daniel's saying, which is that the same model that we use as medics is the one that we use as psychologists and social workers on our way to a call. Meaning the GPS that calls medics to the nearest event, whatever that event is the same GPS that we use to call psychologists and social workers. Whoever is closest, that's who will go and treat on the scene. So it's a very, very similar model.
So we've discussed this, the Psychotrauma Crisis and Response Unit.
A few times on here.
We've definitely, people who have been listening to us, I think at this point we've done a good job explaining what it is. I think what we want to differentiate this time is our medics showing up at situations in Israel. Like, unfortunately, last night there was a terrible terrorist attack, and I know that Psychotrauma was there and called in right away to help for bystanders or people that were dealing with the trauma. But let's talk about the discrepancy between those kind of calls and a mission. So as you mentioned already, we've gone on many missions. I mean, this started years ago when Dovi Mizell already went to Nepal and Haiti, and then we've done Texas and Florida for hurricanes, and you mentioned Surfside. Ukraine is another ballpark. It's something completely and totally different. So Sharon, would you like to start by telling us, A, the difference between psychotrauma in Israel versus a mission, and then B, why this mission was different than missions in the past?
Okay, well, let's address the first question of how psychotrauma in international waters is different than within Israel. And that's an easy answer, because when we get called by the psychotrauma unit in Israel, we're being called to an event that is ongoing. And at most, we get there minutes after the event has occurred, and we're treating people in their very initial state of reaction to the event. When we're called overseas, we may come hours, days, or even a week after the event has started. And in the case of Surfside, we arrived 3 days after the event began. In the case of Moldova, some of the staff arrived 3 days after, but the psychotrauma unit arrived a week after the war had broken out. So already just in terms of timing of event, it's very different when we have to organize ourselves, get on a plane, and go over to another locale. That's the first difference. As far as Moldova versus other delegations that we've had, Moldova was a refugee situation. When I was in Surfside 9 months ago, there were no refugees. There were family members who were waiting for answers, who had no answers, who were looking to us to provide answers that we could not give them. And so our role was one of support to the families in a state of uncertainty. In the sense that there is uncertainty in being a refugee, there's some overlap, but I think that in this case, where we were looking at young women with babies, some elderly, but mostly young women with babies who hadn't had enough to eat or drink, who didn't have diapers or formula, who didn't know where they were laying down their head that night. The physical needs in this instance were tremendous and sat side by side with the psychological needs. So there was a lot of work, and it was different work than what I've ever seen before on missions.
How is everyone communicating with the refugees? Do they speak English? Do you have enough translators? Is another organization providing translators? Can you just give us like a picture of how that communication and assistance is happening?
So basically, the way the teams were organized was really well done by the United Souls management. Every team had a translator as integral built into part of the team. Also had a representative of the psychotrauma unit and medics and paramedics. So each unit was self-sufficient and had the language skills needed. Although I found that English, and for many of the Jews and Israeli citizens who were coming over, Hebrew, basic English covered the day, and when stuck, the Russian language translator was with us. But there were some, like sort of what Sharon had referred to, there's a lot of commonality as well in what we're doing with the patients. We're looking at them as patients as we're treating them from a psychotrauma perspective. Now, it's not someone we're going to sit with for 2-3 hours. A lot of this is touch and go. Literally, you have a few words that you can share with them, and then you're on their way. And there are a couple of things we needed. We prepped ourselves and our team members with. Number one, the first time when you see a person coming off the bus, do not take their suitcase. Their suitcase represented their entire grounding to their previous life. And if you were to insert yourself uninvited to that, you were separating themselves from what grounded them. That suitcase was their entire life. And when you begin to wrap your mind around what that suitcase meant for people, you started to sort of understand where they're coming from. The next thing that we had to be aware of, and this is a baseline psychotrauma message that we give over, you are safe now. Many of these people came from the front lines. They crossed over to Moldova. We met them at the northern or the southern checkpoints, and it was very important for us to chronologically and situationally change their mindset or assist them in that mindset. You are safe now. That's a vital message, and something that we can give over in a line or two. And for many people, you just saw the weight come off their shoulders when they recognized, okay, now I'm in your hands. That was like fascinating to see.
I was just going to say, we also learned a little bit of Russian there. I mean, we had translators, and I know how to say my name is Sharon and what's your name, and I know how to say toy and lollipop and bubbles, and we learned how to say
words.
these. And the rest of communicating
amazing.
with children is a little bit of an international language. You communicate with them through play.
Right.
So even if they didn't speak English or Hebrew, we were able to communicate with them. I think Daniel's bringing up a very important point, which is we didn't do therapy there. It was not about therapy. The last thing we wanted to do was arouse their emotional state because they were already emotionally overwhelmed. And a lot of our role as the psychotrauma unit was to instruct the other medics about what not to do. Even if it was instinctive, it would be instinctive to take a child and help a mother who had been holding that child for 8 hours at the border and give her a break and give her arms a break. But it's also important to recognize that the child was recently uprooted from his home. He's overwhelmed. The only source of security he has right now is his mother. And if you take him away, you're going to probably make his mother anxious and him anxious. So with all the best of intentions, we had to instruct people, don't help them with the suitcase unless they would like help, and don't take their children away from them. So it wasn't so much therapy that we did as much as helping the refugees where they needed help and where they couldn't help themselves, because it was very important to let them help themselves and not take away their agency. They already lost everything else they have. If they can help themselves, that would be ideal. And also to teach the other medics how to relate to them in a way that was sometimes counterintuitive.
Which is interesting because I'm sitting here like, oh, shoot, I did the wrong thing. Because I went to the airport twice, and one of the times I was holding a woman's baby for a while she was doing corona tests with her other kids. And now I'm thinking, like, maybe that was the wrong thing to do. But I'm curious. I have so many different directions I want to go in. But I could tell you that when I went to the airport, I was going as a media representative, right? And that was really what I was going for, to get stories, to get pictures. And when I got there, I couldn't do my job, and I didn't do my job because I wasn't able to. I was just found myself being really emotional and like hugging people and helping people. The first time I was outside of the airport, the second time I was in the airport, and I was just helping with whatever needed to be done, and I didn't do my job properly. And I feel like I want to hear that from you guys when you went in with, okay, I'm going in as a medic / psychotrauma, knowing that it was more heavy psychotrauma than actual physical medic work. But then I know, Daniel, you ended up in the kitchen, and Sharon, you were peeling potatoes. And so I want to hear about those other roles that you played, and was that shocking to you, and how did that fit into your role? I want to hear this from both of you, but
I can't wait to hear what Daniel
Rabbi,
says.
take it away.
My reputation is thoroughly busted with my wife when it comes to work in the kitchen.
Busted.
One of the most beautiful experiences that we had as a team was that we all did whatever needed to get done. I mean, I have never peeled that many potatoes. That was like a lot of potatoes and garlic and onions, whatever.
I still smell it all these years later. I'm just kidding.
There was so much work to be done. We had to, that first week, we had to get up to 1,500 portions per day. This is Erev Shabbat. We had to get this done. And it was, well, it needs to get done. And it was literally time to roll up your sleeves and get it done. And, so you had, Rabbi Daniel Katzenstein alongside Dr. Sharon Slater, alongside some lady who was a out-of-work flight attendant who I met on the flight back when she was no longer out of work, Baruch Hashem. Everyone just came together to work to get whatever needed to get done, whether it was schlepping suitcases, whether it was bandaging injuries, whether it was setting up the clinic, whether it was making phone calls, working on the computer to get the flights together. It was nonstop work, and whatever. It was really, yes, sir, whatever needed to get done.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think that Daniel pointed out something really important, which is that there was a tremendous bonding effect from the teamwork there, in the sense that there were no titles, there was no prestige, there was whatever needed to get done was going to get done by the closest able-bodied person to do it, and we all worked as a team, as a unit, and it was a very beautiful Friday.
Wow.
We worked very hard, but it was very beautiful. And one other word about the food. It's great to provide psychological services, but not on an empty stomach. The most important thing when you're hungry is to eat, not to have somebody hear your story and help you process that. So with all due respect to psychology, there's nothing that replaces basic needs like food. And interestingly enough, we all walked away from our first dinner on our first night in Moldova saying, wow, now we get it. Because we hadn't eaten for about 36 hours. We came into the kitchen of the synagogue in Kishinev. We were provided with about 20 tiny pieces of pasta, a thumb-sized piece of indistinguishable ground meat, and a half a cup of soup. And it was a king's feast for us. It changed our moods, it changed our general feeling, and we walked away saying, oh, we get it now. If you don't have food, then all the rest of it is worth nothing. And that, I think, and that happened Thursday night, I think it gave me, at least, a whole new perspective on Friday peeling potatoes.
Right.
I peeled 20 kilograms of potatoes, but I felt very differently about it. After experiencing that Thursday night meal, I think everybody did. We understood that psychological services will wait until everybody gets at least one hot meal. And that was the attitude going into that first weekend.
Absolutely. It reminds me when I was in Poland in the dead of winter, freezing cold, and a lot of my co-seminary friends were complaining how cold it was, and I was like, guys, we're wearing 5 pairs of socks and tons of, thermal underwear and blankets on top of our coats and hats, and just imagine this is what they were with nothing. So it really was able to help us put that in perspective.
I actually wanted to ask about the cold, because you see it on the news, and you see everyone in their jackets and the snow, but can you speak about a little bit more about the weather and how that affected the whole situation? Because imagine if it was in the summer, would be a different situation. There's heat, there was enough heating, there was enough blankets, there was enough people need more food in the winter. So
I'll even say, I want to add to that if I can. It's a great question. Meaning you're talking about their physical, needs being met before their psychological. So we talked about food. What about warmth? What about sleep?
There wasn't much warmth. I personally was in a room without heating. I think most of the medics were in rooms without heating. Every night, from the time I got there until the time I left, I slept in 2 sets of thick, heavy-duty thermals, 2 sets of thermal socks, gloves, cap, and jacket. 2 fleece jackets under my over jacket, and I could not get warm. That was indoors. And my roommate and I, who were sharing a tiny bed, we had no shower, we had no heat, and still we knew we were better off than the refugees who were out there with infants. And that was really what was going through our mind. They were out there with infants. They were traveling on buses. Buses in the Ukraine, by law, need to stop by 10 p.m. Most of the refugees I spoke to told me that their buses stopped early at 8 p.m., and then they were on an unheated bus that was turned off, and they were sleeping, sitting up in below zero weather for 1 night, 2 nights, 3 nights with babies. So one thing that I personally came back with, and Daniel, I'd be interested to hear if you too, I came back with a huge appreciation for my bed, my thick coverlet, my warm clothes. I came back with a whole different feeling about basic needs like enough food, like enough warmth. I'm curious to know if you came back with the same feeling.
Well, there's first of all, there's a little bit of a mea culpa here. When I got the key to my room, the lady behind the concierge, if you can call her that, this was a 3-quarter-star hotel. Once upon a time, she, in her Ukrainian English or Moldovan English, is, "I have the best room for you. It has heat." So I got the best room. My room had heat. So, I wasn't sharing it, but I did have heat, and it was Spartan, but it did what it needed to do for me. While I did make Aliyah from Dallas, which is warm, I grew up in Muncie, which has its winters. I actually enjoyed the cold. Again, we were always wearing like 4 layers of clothing, and the people that we saw generally were temperature aware. I mean, the people weren't coming across in rags. People were coming across generally in proper clothing, but they were staying in it for hours and hours. And I don't care what you're wearing. Over time, it's grinding. The cold is just. I mean, we found us as the people that came to help others. We were cold, we were hungry, and we were not sleeping just by the nature of what it took to be there. Days ran into nights, nights ran into days. Cold. We didn't have our suitcases for the first 4 days, so all those layers. It's 4 days of the same clothing.
Wow.
But like, we didn't. No one complained. I don't think anyone complained. There was, some good-natured banter about it. But who am I going to complain to?
Right.
Sure.
The guy who's waiting outside?
No, it wasn't about who you're going to complain to. It was just a group of 50 people who did not complain. I personally did not change from the minute I got on the plane Wednesday until I arrived back on Tuesday. I had no working shower. I had no suitcase, so I didn't change. I was in my clothes for 5 days. But I wasn't the only one, and nobody complained. No one complained about peeling potatoes, about being cold, about not having enough food, not sleeping enough. Wow. It was an incredible group of people, period.
Yeah.
That was just the
And
group
50
that we were
people
with.
is when you were there, but all together we've had, do we know the number of how many medics have been there now? It's for sure over 150, that I know.
And what about the number of refugees coming in per day? Can you speak a bit about the volume of buses and?
I don't know I can't tell you specific numbers, but I thought one thing was fascinating when we were like a long time at the northern border. We opened up the United Hatzalah tent there with the big Israeli flag, and people.
Was that in Polanka? Or
no, that was in Mogilov Podolsky. Did I get that right? Magda Podolsky. The Jews and the Israelis just sort of, aggregated around one by one, two by two families. They aggregated to us and said, we have the golden ticket that can get us to Israel. Can you help us? And I was like, you came to the right place. When they knew they came to the right place. So it was amazing how we just embraced everyone, and then they embraced others. And then we would take, once we had a busload of people who had come together at our station, we had a bus that would take them to Kishinev, and from Kishinev either to Yashi in Romania, or with eventually straight flying out of Kishinev.
But but in Kishinev proper, where our base was, there were busloads coming around the clock. Buses would come at 2 a.m., 4 a.m., and discharge 50 people, women and children,
in the middle
round
of
the clock, in the middle of the night, all hours of the day and
I
night.
thought the buses had to stop at 10.
No, these were buses sent by the consul to pick people up at the border. These were buses. These were not city buses or intercity buses. They were coming directly to the synagogue, which is where our base was, and they would come at all hours of the day and night. So there was a constant flow of refugees coming in to sign up for flights, to get a hot meal, and to look for a place to sleep. And it was literally round the clock. Whenever you would go, you would find people walking in. They walked in off the street. They came in off buses. They were always coming in.
I have so many questions that I don't even know which direction to go in. I want to talk for a minute about props. You had mentioned before bubbles and lollipops. I want to hear why those words were so important for you to learn in Russian versus Band-Aid and oxygen kit, for example.
Okay. Well, I wasn't there as a medic. I was there as a psychologist. So Band-Aid and oxygen kit, I left to the other medics. I grabbed myself one of the Russian-speaking, he's a nurse in Israel, but he's actually an OBGYN in Ukraine. And I said to him, Victor, we're going to have a little quick Russian lesson now, and you're going to teach me how to say my name is, and what is your name, and how do I say all the following words. Have you eaten? Have you had something to drink? How do you say toys? We had very specific props. I went on a quick shopping trip when I found out I was going. On the day, we had about 24 hours notice on that day. I went to the supermarket and I bought 3 huge bags of lollipops because the psychiatrist once told me that the sucking motion is very soothing for children. And so I was giving out lollipops right and left. The bubbles are because for people who understand the sympathetic and the parasympathetic system, the parasympathetic system is activated by blowing out, and that is the system that calms the body down. So I wanted children blowing bubbles. If they blew bubbles, they're blowing out, and that will soothe them. So bubbles were very important, and we had tons of bubbles. We had more bubbles than we knew what to do with. We stuffed them in our pockets, we stuffed them in our bags. We had tons of bubbles. We also
there were
wanted
lots of medics who were blowing bubbles too.
Yes, and the medics were
Sure.
blowing bubbles too, and that was probably good for them too.
Absolutely.
Not just for the children. And the last thing that I wanted, and I took as many of those as I could, in fact, we even stopped on our way to the border and picked up some more, were soft dolls or stuffed animals, so that the children could have something warm and soft to hug while they were waiting on endless lines for whatever they were waiting for.
Wow.
So those were the props.
Wow. Okay, my next question is, I want to talk a little bit about, we know by the law of return, for people who don't know, the law of return allows anyone with who is Jewish, or prove that they're Jewish, however that is determined, we won't get into, and they're able to return to Israel. And then I also heard if they had a family member, right, whether they were Jewish or not, but if they had a family member living in Israel, that was kind of their ticket in. So I'm assuming that there are a lot of people that showed up who didn't fit into that category requesting passage to Israel. I've heard this from different medics. I wanted to know if you had any encounters with people who were being told they couldn't come to Israel on our flights and were struggling with that. And maybe this is a moot point. Maybe this is not even a question. I'm just curious if that happened.
It was a very, very critical question, critical in an important sense. United Hatzalah never differentiated between Jews and non-Jews in the services we provided. Certainly at the border, whoever came by wanted to drink, we had water. Whoever wanted food, we had food. The toys, the bubbles, the lollipops, that was given out. You didn't have to prove anything. As far as law of return and rights, every country has a set of laws that define who's allowed to get citizenship and who's allowed to get a visa. And Israel, like any other country, has those laws. United States was not party to the decision of who fulfills those laws. We just had to fill out a form, and we helped people. What's your passport number? What country is your passport from? You know, do you meet these criteria that the Jewish Agency has set for us? We were not making any decisions. When I was at the bus line and checking papers to see who was on the list, frankly, that was probably both the hardest thing for me to do as a human being and as a Jew, but it was also the most meaningful. I had the list. People came to me and said, am I on the list? And if they were on the list, they can go past me to the bus. And then from the bus, they can go to Israel. If they weren't on the list, they couldn't. So the first few people, everyone went smoothly. One man was overcome and he hugged me, and I'm like, I'm just the guy with the list. It's not me. We're part of a team, but when we started encountering the challenges, like the mother whose 2 children were on the list, but her own mother wasn't on the list, it was, look, sweetie, don't throw that at me. There's a process, and if you can just go back, I'll point you in the direction, go back to the base, this is what you got to do, and then we can get you on this flight. When after a couple more people, some woman says, I just want to go home. This was an Israeli, and she didn't have her papers with her, and she wasn't on the list, and she starts breaking down and crying, and I'm like, this is not good for me. It's not about me. I think I got a snowflake in my eye, and I'm going to have to turn away for a moment. We helped her too. We helped everyone we could, and if they couldn't come to Israel, there were other solutions. This wasn't the end of the line. This was an opportunity. If you can get to Israel, we were there to help. Israel was there to help. In Moldova, it was United Hatzalah taking this mission. It was an absolute honor to be part of this mission, but it was very, very hard.
Sure. I'm going to direct the next question to you, Sharon, which is also a super difficult one. You have to realize that Amy and I, being in the media, we've been watching and seeing and viewing and encountering all these stories through media. So whether that was interviews, news, articles, pictures, videos, but we've been really living it as well. Obviously not the way you have. But something that's really been struck me is one of the most difficult parts of this entire story, narrative of this war, are women and children having to leave their husbands, fathers, sons. And I wanted to know if you encountered anyone who were in that situation that were dealing with that kind of trauma. If you could talk to us about that.
I think all of us encountered many young women who were in that situation. I think probably the majority of refugees that I was in contact with were women who had to leave their husbands behind, and some of them had to make very, very difficult choices because some of them had teenagers. So they would take their 6-year-old and their 10-year-old, but they would have to leave their 18-year-old at home with their husband. So it was really a Sophie's choice kind of situation. And I remember that the very first mother that I encountered had the most beautiful 3-year-old I think I've ever laid eyes on, named Carolina. And she played with us and engaged with us for a good 45 minutes. And the mother was pregnant and crying because she was afraid that she was going to have this baby and her husband wouldn't be present at the birth. And she was also afraid that she wouldn't have anybody to leave her 3-year-old with when she had the baby. These are things that, are taken for granted in countries where families are intact. So there were a whole bunch of ramifications, but most of the people I met had, in fact, left spouses behind. And one mother said to me, I left him behind when the city was being carpet bombed. I don't think I'm actually going to see him again. She had a 5-year-old daughter. We were at the border. We were heading through the border. We were very close, and we had stopped to speak to a group that was on their way back to Kishinev. And the mother of this 5-year-old was in tears and saying, putting her hand on her 5-year-old's head, saying, this is all I have left because I don't think I'm ever going to see him again. And it was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking for those of us who worked with them. And it was heartbreaking for them to have to consider that this might have been the final goodbye. It was really a terrible situation in every way.
And I'm wondering if you know from your training, you said before what you don't say, but also what do you say? Because I heard also on the news and from different sources that a lot of Ukrainians felt like this could happen all their lives, and now it happened. And are people positive about the future? It's going to end soon. It's not going to end soon. What do you give optimism, support? Like what kind of work? You said what not to say, but can I understand a few things that you did say to some of these women?
Like, you can't say to them, "Don't worry, it's going to be okay."
Right. You
Exactly.
Never say, "Don't worry, it's going to be okay."
Exactly.
Because then,
So
because if you say, "Don't worry, it's going to," you have no idea if it's going to be okay. If you're trying to relate to a future that's uncertain, you're going to say something that's either it's either untrue or it's unknown, and we were not looking to do that. This mother who was crying to me that she thinks she said goodbye to her husband for the last time, I put my hand on her daughter's head and I said, I bet you derive a lot of strength from this little girl. And she said, she is my angel. She has held me up. And that, I think, was really what we were trying to keep them focused on the present, focused on what they had, focused on what they need to do now, focused on the tasks in front of them. If we try to move their minds toward the future, we would have been deceiving them, and we were really interested in holding them together, not having them fall apart. So when she said, this little girl has held me together, something in her quieted down, because she realized that she wasn't alone, and she had a role as a mother to keep herself together for this little girl. And so that would be an example of something I would say in a situation where she says, I'm not sure I'm going to see my husband again. I would never say, I'm sure you will.
Right.
No, I think that you really need training to be able to say those right things. I think as a regular person, my natural instinct would say it's going to be okay, it's going to be over soon, and it's not true. Do you agree, Sarah,
100%.
with that? Yeah.
There's no question. If you don't have the training, that's why I'm happy to hear that you were also training the medics there, what to say and what not to say, because I'm sure a lot of harm could have been done without that training.
I think people, people instinctively want to make things better for people who are in pain, and sometimes saying the wrong thing can do more damage. But that is really, as Daniel was saying before, that is where Daniel saw a hole in the system and said, let's fill that hole. The psychotrauma unit and the medics work hand in hand. There really is, there's no gap there. We all work together. We all support each other. It's not that the psychologists and social workers in the psychotrauma unit are above trauma or above feeling, pain or angst at what they're seeing, and we lean on each other and we lean on the medics. And so, yes, we helped them, but they helped us too, to be honest.
Which is a perfect segue. I would love to hear, maybe Daniel can talk to us about this, about, we've discussed this before, how psychotrauma is also done for our medics and internally. So I recently yesterday spoke to Dr. Einat Kaufman about someone specific, and she said every single person who gets off the plane from being on this mission in the delegation is given a call and checked upon afterwards. Can you tell us about the work the psychotrauma unit is doing with our medics that have gone and experienced their own? I'm sure when they're there, it's all adrenaline, and then they come home, and I'm just guessing, but everything kind of hits them when they get back. Can you talk to us about that a little bit?
Sure. It is built into the system at United Hatzalah in the Psychotrauma unit that any time a volunteer goes to any call, even during our day-to-day emergencies, there's a follow-up call after the volunteer has responded, and it checks on the welfare of the volunteer. The importance of that following a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks is just compounded. And we're set up for that, and everyone, including myself, received or they haven't come back yet, will receive such a phone call. One of the benefits of a psychotrauma responder for themselves is that we are a little bit more cognizant of the requirement for self-care, and we make it our business to make sure we try to make it our business to eat appropriately, sleep appropriately, take care of ourselves appropriately, to make sure that we have the emotional strength to continue. Many of us, and my own experience was, when I would call my wife regularly to vent my experiences, she must have felt that she became a psychotrauma responder. Because I was, after a full day of being full on dealing with other people's burdens, I needed to unload. And I thank my wife for being there for me so that I could be there for others.
I'd like to add to what Daniel's saying, because just before walking in here to do this podcast, Daniel and I were discussing the issue of who you talk to when you come back from something like this, either as a first responder medic or as a psychologist. And Saturday night after we got back from the mission, or at least after the first group got back from the mission, 30 of the 50 of us met together to discuss what it was like for us and to talk about what our difficult and challenging moments were individually and as a group. And it was incredibly healing. It was incredibly healing for all of us to hear from other people and also to have a chance to be heard. And along those lines, and this is something that I find unique to United Hatzalah, there's no distinction between your average medic and the head of the psychotrauma unit. You mentioned Dr. Einat Kaufman. She was the first to share her feelings. She said, I don't know about you guys, but I did a lot of emotional eating when I came back. Anybody in the room feel the same? And every hand went up. A lot of people left on vacation for a couple of days after coming back, needing to clear their heads. Everybody from the top down, from the people who ran the mission right down to the simple medics, everybody opened up and shared their experiences. It was extremely helpful for all of us to hear what everybody else went through. So, that is also a piece, is that we lean on each other.
This is probably a question for both of you, but I'm just wondering if there was something that was challenging for either of you that never was challenging for you in the past on a mission, or something that you didn't know about yourself that you found out while you were there.
There was a moment that that touched deeper than I had expected. I had been in the synagogue over Shabbat, and I'd been on call for psychotrauma issues. And sure enough, during the Friday night meal, a woman I was brought to the dining area where the refugees were, and a woman had come out. She had been enjoying the meal and had burst out crying. So they escorted her out of the room and gave us a little place to talk. So the answers, when I was trying to communicate, she had some basic Hebrew. I was communicating with her. And Dr. Einat Kaufman came to assist as a psychiatrist. And I was going to give the chair to Dr. Kaufman. I'm like, Bavakasha. And she's no, she had me stay there because I had built the initial trust with this woman who had lost so much. And we were trying to figure out what was challenging her. And I said, well, where are you from? And she said, Israel. I'm like, okay, so let's go with that. And I communication. So where in Israel? She said she's from Jerusalem. I said, oh, Jerusalem. I mentioned some of the, main streets in Jerusalem. So where are you from? She said Har Nof. I'm like, oh, you're from Har Nof. I'm like, well, I've got two sisters in Har Nof. Do you know Katzenstein and Shaul's in the main streets? And she said, no. I'm like, well, that's weird. If you're from Har Nof, you would have to know those streets. And again, you talk about things that come from experience, and this was something of a godsend. I said, do you know Kfar Shaul, which is a psychological facility, and the entrance to Har Nof? And she's like, yes. And then it became clear to me that she was not only a refugee, she was a refugee who has psychological issues. And it brought, what hit me is stories, what it was, I remember from my Uncle Leslie, who had Down syndrome, and he worked as a messenger in downtown Manhattan, and they found him on 9/11 hugging a lamppost, screaming. And the reason we understand afterwards is because, I knew my Uncle Leslie, he needed everything organized every morning. My grandmother, she rest in peace, would prepare his lunch in his little metal lunchbox, and it would always have the same thing, was a banana and a sandwich and something else. And he would go off to work on the train, and he would be a messenger in Manhattan, do a great job, and he would come back home on the train. He knew it better than I did. When the world went kablooey in 9/11, that was overwhelming for people who have the capacity to handle normalcy. It was too much. For someone who needs regimen, it was absolutely overwhelming, and he never recovered from that. I found myself relating to this woman. Being a refugee, putting your entire life into a suitcase, going off into the unknown, is hard enough for someone who's well-balanced and can handle the vicissitudes of life. I just was blown away by the challenges that this young woman was facing, in addition to the regular burdens of living. The fact that I was able to give her a few moments of calmness and help her base herself, to ground herself once again, for me was very encouraging. And again, it was just inspiring for myself to have been able to be there for her. I don't know if that answers your question, but
it definitely answers the question. And I can't get over your detective work over there. It's pretty incredible. I know that I read one thing that I have these little things that stuck out for me. And one thing is I was reading about a woman and her autistic daughter. And having worked many years with autism, with children with autism, the first thing I thought was, oh my God, I cannot think of a worst case scenario for a refugee is someone with autism who needs regimen and schedule and routine. And here they are just being through not knowing what's next on the schedule. But I would love to hear also from you, Sharon, and also if you have a specific story of
Well, okay, I'll give you a specific story. I'll say that my challenges were more technical. I think I've never treated in a language that was not either English or Hebrew. And I was busy cramming Duolingo on the plane over to Moldova to try and learn Russian as quickly as possible, and type into my phone, download apps that would teach me Russian. I've never tried to do psychological work of any kind without knowing the language, and so this was definitely a first for me from a technical standpoint. I'm thinking of a particular young woman named Alona, with whom I'm still in touch. I gave her my phone number. She gave me hers. She and I spoke last night, and we've been texting ever since we landed. She showed up on Saturday evening after leaving her home on Thursday morning. She spent Wednesday night in the bathroom of her home because the bathroom is the innermost room. of her home, and the city was being carpet bombed. She's from Kiev. Her husband is Israeli. She is Ukrainian. He went back for business, and she was alone, completely alone. On Saturday evening, in walks somebody who looks like she's straight off the runway in Paris or New York, but definitely does not belong in Kishinev, Moldova. She's wearing a leather jacket with a fur muff and designer clothes. She's a beautiful 27-year-old who looks like a model. She definitely doesn't belong as she fit the surroundings, and she's pale as pale can be. I approached her and asked her whether she had eaten. And she said, I really don't need to eat. I just need a shower. Do you think you can get me a shower? As the evening went by, and I did get her to eat because I found out that she hadn't actually eaten in 2 days. She had run out of food 2 days prior. I found out that she had taken a bus on Thursday morning after sitting up all night Wednesday. And the bus stopped at 8 o'clock, and she froze overnight sitting up in the bus because she was inadequately dressed. And the bus started up again on Friday morning and stopped again at 8 p.m. on Friday night and dropped them off at an abandoned sleepaway camp where they had bunks. And the bunks were below freezing, so 10 of them went into each bunk and tried to sleep on the floor with no ability to sleep. And she showed up on the third day, having run out of food a long time ago, having not slept in 3 nights, and all she wanted was a shower. And happily, one of the medical students who was volunteering from us, who was also 27 years old, an Israeli girl named Amit, took her home, gave her a shower, and kept her for the next 2 days. Wow. And I said to her, why did you decide to keep her? I was very happy that Alona was going to get a real bed with a bathroom and a shower attached. But I said, Amit, why did you decide to keep her? And she said, I looked at her and I was looking in the mirror at myself in a different situation. And that was incredibly moving for me. Alona and I are still in touch, and it took her a while to feel like she was able to eat enough and sleep enough. And she told me just last night that only now is she starting to feel like her life is moving back to any sense of normalcy.
Wow. Is she going to be coming back to Israel?
She is in Israel.
She's in
She was on the flight with me, and randomly, if you believe in randomness, she was randomly assigned to the seat next to me on the flight home. So we had a lot of time to talk. Alona is a 27-year-old aeronautical engineer whose job is to check airplanes for quality assurance. Wow. Yep, I found that out on the flight on the way home. Pretty wild.
So we have to end. We have to. I don't even know. I could just can go on and on. I guess there's so much more to say. That's a very good point you just made about how she looked out of context. So I actually wanted to bring this up, and then I forgot, and I'm glad you mentioned it. So Rabbi, you can help us out here. Tell me, where is it sourced in the Torah that if someone loses, no pressure, I want the verse and the exact, no, just kidding. But I know there's a concept in Torah that if someone loses money and they're very, very wealthy, you need to pay. The charity that they need to get is to the level of what their norm is and what they're used to. So based on that Torah concept, I'll call it for now, when I was I have this one picture of this family that I was talking to at the airport, and like you said, they stepped off where they were standing, and I was looking at them, and I'm like, oh my God, okay, like leather, gorgeous nails, all the women's hair was dyed, beautiful clothing. They had 2 fancy dogs, I forgot what they're called now, in like leather cases with chains, really beautiful luggage. And I'm thinking, like, what did they leave back at home? Like, what was their house like? What was their car like? How, like, were people, okay, of course there were the people that were showing up, maybe, okay, for everyone it was too cold and they were too hungry and they had to leave their home. But what about this level, maybe Rabbi, you can help us out here. Like, these people who were actually coming from, maybe, can I say wealth, or a higher level of comfort than even just with the standard Joe or Svetlana?
Look, we look at, I mean, I'll start with answering your question. The guidelines for tzedakah and chesed of providing the servants that a wealthy person who has fallen on hard times requires, the concept behind that that law or that halachic guideline is to crawl into the mindset of the person you're trying to help. If you can understand what a person has lost, you can begin to provide them with some semblance of normalcy. Someone who had been homeless before the war began is not really finding the new environment so trying. So to a certain level, the people of Ukraine, many of these people came from either some basis of wealth and some from extreme wealth. And they came with nothing but literally with the shirts on their back or with the one suitcase. And it is our job, it was our role to, from a psychological perspective, to recognize what their loss is and provide what we could so we can give them some sense of normalcy and return to normalcy. It's not a matter of how much money or what item to provide, but it's a matter of recognizing that you're experiencing loss, and now we're going to provide you with a return to normalcy, or at least a new normalcy.
That's a good answer.
Well, okay.
Yeah, we have to basically wrap up. I just wanted to know, do you have any more questions, Amy?
Yeah, I was just wondering if either of you are going back, because I'm just getting a WhatsApp now that there's a plane landing tonight from bringing refugees from Poland, and I know Romania. I know the mission's not over, and we're continuing our work, and we still have many volunteers there. So what is your plan, if I can ask?
I'm not going back. The psychotrauma unit generally provides just immediate on-the-spot care. We don't provide continued long-term care. In a situation like this, which is an ongoing situation, we will refresh the staff continually. And by the time we took off, the four of us who were on the senior psychotrauma unit, there were 4 people already in the air going in the other direction. Wow. So we do refresh, but I think I personally am only now physically recuperating. I got sick while I was there from the lack of sleep. I stayed sick for 2 weeks after. I think my body's had it, and I don't think that I'm capable of going back to this particular locale, but there have been at least 2 more shifts of social workers and psychologists who have replaced our group.
I think that as an EMT, we never know what the day is going to bring. Our baseline is ready for anything. If there's a need, if there's a call, and this is something that I discussed with there was a family on my bus to the airport. They asked me, why did you come? And the question took me by surprise. And I remembered a conversation with Rav Shimon Schwab. Was my family is from German Jewish stock, and he was one of the leading rabbis. He told the story when he was a young boy, and he had learned by the great Chafetz Chaim. The Chafetz Chaim once asked him, "Are you a Kohen?" And Rav Shimon Schwab said no, knowing that the Chafetz Chaim is a Kohen. And the Chafetz Chaim then asked him and said, "Well, why are you not a Kohen?" Now this young boy was like, "Well, I'm not a Kohen because my father wasn't a Kohen." And the Chafetz Chaim, who was the Gadol Hador, the great luminary of the generation, asks this little boy, he says, "Well, why wasn't your father a Kohen?" Now the boy's beginning to wonder, and he says, "Well, because his Zaidi, his grandfather wasn't a Kohen." And then the Chafetz Chaim, not letting go, said, "Well, why wasn't his Zaidi a Kohen?" And to shorten the story, the Shimon Schwab wisely asked the Chafetz Chaim, "Well, you tell me." And the Chafetz Chaim's answer was that when at the Golden Calf, when the call came out, Mi Lashem Elai, who will come to the call of God? My Elter Zayda, my great grandfather, answered the call. Who will answer the call? So the Chafetz Chaim's great grandfather answered the call. And the Chafetz Chaim told Reb Shimon Schwab, he says, when the call comes out, who will answer the call of God? Make sure you answer. So I answered this person on the bus at Kishinev. I said, when I heard the call, who will come for God? I said, Daniel Katzenstein is answering. If there's another call, I'll try to answer.
I love that. Your wife might need you home to peel potatoes at Pesach, though. Any parting words from either one of you, a message or something you want?
Thanks for having us.
Same, nothing more to add.
I think we're really moved, and it's we're in the media department and we've seen everything going on, but to hear from the both of you more in depth has been very meaningful, and I'm sure for our listeners.
I don't know if you can hear my sniffles, but I've been holding back the tears the entire time. It's very, very meaningful. Thank you so much for schlepping and schlepping.
Thank you so much for coming.
We should only hear good things and only know good things in the future.
Amen.
Thank you so much for listening to the United Humans podcast.
Share this with a friend, subscribe, and we already know you're going to leave us a positive review, so we'll just thank you now for that.
Bye.
Adios.